to ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the reported demonstrations in South Uist due to ferry withdrawal.
Cabinet Secretary Mairi McAllan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Before moving to the very important matter of ferry services to South Uist, I want to acknowledge the news this morning that my colleague, the former Minister for Transport, has tendered his resignation from post. I want to thank him for his work. I want to wish him well and ask that he's given the space to recover from the matters that he's very bravely spoken of this morning. But moving to the substantive question and the important matters in hand, I want to acknowledge very clearly the dissatisfaction and upset which is felt. Ministers are very well aware of the strength of feeling from engagement that we've had, including from the former Transport Minister's recent visit to South Uist and from meetings including with the South Uist Business Impact Group. Technical issues with major vessels and delays to the annual overhaul programme have led to cancellations of sailings, and regrettably there are some which have been more impacted than others. Ultimately, South Uist evidenced this by their demonstration on Sunday. The fact that they have lost confidence in CalMac, I think, is clear to see. We have expressed our disappointment at CalMac at how the communications and engagement have been handled, and I've been very clear that no stone must be left unturned in addressing the issues for the Uists, and I've asked urgently that CalMac review the route prioritisation matrix to ensure that it reflects the socio-economic impacts which pertain in particular to fragile communities like South Uist.
Rhoda Grant.
Can I also wish Kevin Stewart a speedy recovery? Can I say to the Cabinet Secretary, this is not a problem with comms, it's a problem due to the lack of ferries. And the blame for the lack of ferries sits squarely at the door of her government. She must stop passing the buck, because South Uist has lost confidence, not in CalMac, but in the Scottish Government. She must be concerned when she sees a third of the population of South Uist demonstrate their displeasure. If 200,000 local people descended on this Parliament protesting, the Scottish Government couldn't possibly ignore them. Businesses are going to the wall because of this government's failure to provide ferries. Will she now compensate them?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the operational matters on the running of the ferry network, they are for CalMac, so it is only right that I reflect that in this Parliament. But I will not prevaricate on the point that pressure in our ferry network is as acute as it has been. Ministers empathise deeply with communities who have been affected. We understand their frustration. And for our part, for what we are responsible for, we are working in the here and now to press CalMac on the prioritisation matrix, which I mentioned in Ms Grant's initial question. On communications, I understand that is perhaps the tip of the iceberg, but it is important nonetheless for day-to-day activities, and on ensuring that disruption is as minimal as possible. All the while, the Government is working to find and to procure new vessels, additional vessels for the network, with 6 vessels due on the network in the coming years, beginning as soon as spring. And on the matter that the member raises regarding compensation, these have understandably, they've rightly been raised many a time with this Government. We've looked at the penalty deductions that are made in relation to failures on the network, and my view is that we should continue to use that money to reinvest in the ferry network. And if I can give an example of how that is working to date, the £9 million cost of the charter of the MV Alfred, which is currently providing resilience on the route to Arran, is partly funded by performance deductions from CalMac of around £1 to £3 million per year. I think it's right that that money continues to be used for that purpose, because we can see how it adds resilience to the network.
Rhoda Grant.
The Cabinet Secretary is well aware that CalMac cannot build ferries. The Scottish Government can build ferries. And she says they've paid £9 million for a charter. They could have bought the boat for £9 million. Here in Edinburgh, businesses were rightly compensated due to disruption when the tram line was being built. The Government have clawed back £2.5 million last year alone from CalMac and penalties. She could create a resilience fund from that money that was clawed back to help businesses who are going to the wall right now because of her government's incompetence. It seems to me that it's out of sight, out of mind. If it happened in Edinburgh, we wouldn't get away with it. It happens in South Uist, just forget it.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I think that and I will continue to engage with communities on this and indeed press CalMac to do likewise, but I think that what communities want most of all is a ferry service that is reliable for them so that they can get on with their lives without having to worry about the disruption which I flatly acknowledge is causing upset and disruption. But that's why I have outlined why, with the powers within the gift of the Scottish Government, noting that operational matters are for CalMac, we are doing two sets of work. One, pressing CalMac in the here and now to improve the resilience in the service, to improve communications, to test that prioritisation matrix, to make sure that it takes into account all matters which are important to islanders, and at the same time using powers within our gift to procure and to bring vessels onto the network. So, for example, since re-election, the Government has bought and deployed an additional vessel in the MV Lochboisdale. We've chartered the MV Arrow to provide additional resilience and capacity, commissioned 2 new vessels for Isla and 2 new for the Little Minch routes. And that is before we speak of the 801 and 802 due to be delivered from Ferguson's.
Alistair Allen.
Can I likewise recognise the work done by Mr Stewart as Minister, not least through his recent visit to South Uist. South Uist is a community which has had reason to feel that CalMac has been treating them with disdain. CalMac says that the decision to abandon ferry services to the island was essentially due to their prioritisation process. But that is a process that takes no account of the fact that it is the same route, the same community, the same businesses and the same individuals who constantly bear the brunt of disruption. It takes no account of the relative economic fragility of the place and takes no account of island circumstances. So what can be done to challenge and reform this matrix, this process that is depriving South Uist of its ferry and ensure that South Uist stops being the default decision for cancellations every time there is disruption?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I mentioned that the former Transport Minister had met with the South Uist Business Impact Group, and that was on Thursday last week. And discussions within that meeting did principally centre on some of the issues that Dr Allen has rightly narrated, including that route prioritisation matrix. So to help address these issues, ministers have pressed CalMac on the need to review the current matrix to ensure that the points that Dr Allen rightly makes are part of this, and I expect this to be done in consultation with the Ferry Community Board and indeed with community representatives, with really deep consultation with them. Presiding Officer, this afternoon we will meet with CalMac for an update on that work that we have asked them to do, both on the substance of it and indeed with how they are ensuring that communities are consulted as part of the process.
Donald Cameron.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And on behalf of these benches, can I wish Kevin Stewart a swift recovery. Several small businesses from the Uist have contacted me calling for compensation due to lost earnings as a result of the ferry crisis, stating that regular cancellations and rerouting have resulted in cancelled bookings and a real fear for their future. I've asked the First Minister, I've asked Kevin Stewart, can I now ask the Cabinet Secretary, for the sake of these people and their livelihoods, will she revisit the Government's position on the issue of compensation?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, it would be wrong of me to be as candid as I have about how much we understand the frustration of island communities and then to close myself off to having discussions about anything that communities would be calling for. So I recommit ministers to having those conversations like that we had with the South Uist Business Impact Group, like those that we are having with CalMac. But I reiterate that which I said in the previous point on compensation, that I do believe that what islanders want most of all is for the Scottish Government and for CalMac to focus on improving the service in the here and now and for the future, so that reliability on that service is not something that communities have to worry about on a daily basis. I have narrated already how some of the penalty deductions that are made from CalMac are utilised to provide that very resilience that everyone so much desires. And I believe that that is the right way to continue to address the issue of financing improvements, albeit that I am listening to everyone with a view on this matter.